If you didn't catch the video on Arkham Knight earlier this evening, well, I went over the performance of what is not the best on Switch in all honesty. Now, let's be honest, it was also one of the worst performing games when it first came out on PC, and while it is playable on Switch, it does not look very good at all. Distant textures look appalling, there's quite a bit of stutter, and frame rates fluctuate around about 25 to 28 frames per second. So let's have a look at the other games in the trilogy, Arkham Asylum and Arkham City, and we have some quite surprising results, honestly. Remember, you got timestamps if you want to jump to a specific area, and if the video is of any use, then do click all the buttons and let me know in the comments. My name's Mark Walker, welcome back to SwitchUp. Is the Arkham Trilogy worth it on Switch? Well, let's find out. Starting with Arkham Asylum, initially things are looking quite promising. The resolution looks much closer to native, and while it's clearly a less demanding game, just the increase in resolution makes it look almost better than Arkham Knight on Switch. Shadow resolution's also higher here than in that game, and character models, lighting, and the overall environment is much more reminiscent to the other builds of the game. But, there's a but. When we go over to frame rates, strangely, you can actually see that it isn't maintaining 30 frames per second. This was the one of the three that I basically was convinced would have to run at 30 FPS. There was no real reason for it not to. Now, there are locations and areas where it does hit that quite consistently, and it doesn't have the stutter of Knight. So to play, it feels pretty much okay for the most part. But I think it's fair to say it's a little disappointing that we don't see 30 FPS more consistently in the oldest of the three games, especially when we hop over to Arkham City. Now, Arkham City was my favourite of the three. Perhaps it's also fair to say that it was also one of the best optimised at launch, although I might be remembering through rose-tinted glasses as I had a new graphics card at the time. But regardless, you've got larger environments, you've got much larger scale, and here it is running much better. It's 30 frames per second consistently. There are the occasional drop down, but those are the exception rather than the rule. The frame pacing is much better here as well. It just feels more smooth. There's something to be said for artistic direction and style over having all the graphics options cranked to the max. Just take a look at the city. In this version, it's running at almost native resolution again. Enemy models maintain their fidelity, the textures look good, and while I know it's not to the same scope as Arkham Knight, perhaps they could have done a little bit more with Knight to drop the graphical fidelity down, boost the resolution, and still keep some semblance of performance. When we hop over to handheld, Arkham Asylum actually runs better. Now, they reduce a few of the particle effects, and those are what cause the problem in docked mode. You'll see some slowdown when there are particle effects in the air when you're doing detective mode things, but when you switch over to handheld, those go and the game just runs better. Again, mostly 30 frames per second when you're playing in that way. The same story applies for Arkham City in handheld. It's lovely to play it like that. Everything looks sharp and crisp, and I do hope they can do something with Arkham Knight to get it a little better than it is at the moment. So as a package then, well, we've got a strange situation where the first game, it's good enough I'd say, but they do need to do a bit of work to get that 30 FPS all the time. Arkham City is the best of the three by far. And Arkham Knight, well, it's nice that they tried, and it does run and it is playable, but yeah, it's significantly worse than the others. It has degraded visuals through the use of heavy dynamic scaling, textures are bad, and there's quite a bit of stutter in the combat. 2 out of 3 isn't bad. Now, we know the 3 games include all of the DLC. How much space is that going to take up on your Switch? Well, Arkham Knight takes up 27.2 gigs, Arkham City takes up 11.8 gigs, and Asylum 6.8 gigs, bringing you a total download size of 45.8 gigabytes for the trilogy. And while that's not a patch on what it can be on some other platforms, that's pretty darn hefty. So an SD card is almost mandatory. There is a physical available, but the only game on the cartridge is Arkham Asylum. You'll need to download the other 2. In one way that is understandable because, 45 odd gigs is larger than the capacity of the largest SD card on the Switch, which is 32, but I am actually under the impression that there was a 64 gigabyte card that was made available to some developers, but let's be honest, that's going to cost them a lot of money. So yeah, a hefty download if you are going to buy it. If you're buying the trilogy together, then you're looking at £49.99. That's for the digital version, but I've already seen a lot of discounts if you're going the physical route. Here in the UK, both Shop2 and Amazon have got 24% discount, and that takes it down to a much more reasonable £37.95. It might be worth picking it up from PlayAsia and using our discount code if you're in the US. All the info is in the description. We get a little kickback, and you might save some money if you can get the shipping right. If you've never played this trilogy before, it is absolutely excellent. It combines fast-paced combat, some stealth mechanics. It introduces a load of upgrades so you can gradually expand his repertoire of skills, and each of the games also expands upon the last. They kind of got bigger and better in terms of what you could do. They all feature a detective mode of sorts, which varies depending on the circumstance, but will see you following different clues. This might change the vision so that you can see a scent or check out the trajectory of a bullet hole, and you also do get to play as some different characters along the way. All three also feature quite a bit of side content and hidden items, but it was the Riddler challenges that really got me in Arkham City. These have lots of different puzzles that you'll find around the city, and they're optional, but some of them can be real brain busters, and you needed to find them for some of the achievements and to get some of the trophies if you played on other platforms. If you were to try and complete all three games at maximum speed, you'd be looking at around 50 hours of content, but if you actually wanted to find and do all the side content, then you can stretch that to 150 easily. Coming back to the games after so much time, I said it in my previous video, the thing that stands out as having really held up is the combat. You can wail on enemies with the Y button, and then if you're attacked, you'll see a blue indicator and you can press X to do a counter. This means you can constantly flow and string one enemy to the next and do takedowns when they land on the ground, with it always finishing in a nice little slow motion flurry. All three games feature rumble. For me, the HD rumble was a little more nuanced in Arkham Knight, and the sound has carried across excellently. I have already seen a lot of comments saying, just go out and buy a Steam Deck. That clearly is not a viable option for some people, and if you've got a Switch, and this is the only way to play the trilogy, well, the first two games, they're perfectly fine, but Knight, just as it was back when I first played, causes a few issues and might be a bridge too far for the current hardware. Still, by that point, if you finish the other two, I'm sure there'll be a few patches out, and we'll make sure to keep you updated on those. I don't really think it's worth scoring these. The gameplay of them is absolutely fantastic, like top tier. If the performance is good enough for you, then they're essential pickups really, if the Switch is the only place you can play them. But yeah, I'd have to really knock the visuals and performance scores down, even though two of the games run okay, one of them isn't quite up to par. In this instance, I think you're going to have to decide for yourself. I could quite happily play at least two of these like this. Arkham Knight has evaded me once again. Thanks so much for watching. I do hope this was of some use to some of you that were picking up the game today. And as always, let me know in the comments, tickle some buttons, and for all things Switch all the time, keep it Switch up. Cheers guys. I'm not even going to try and do a see ya at this time of night. It is definitely time for bed. See ya.